At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's I Am Duck. Let's begin. Ambassador Savick sighed as he returned to the meeting chamber of the Galactic Council. This was the 5th session humanity had missed, and once again he had wasted hours waiting in the docking bay for their ambassador. What could possibly be so difficult for humans about keeping to a schedule? Savick crossed his white-scaled arms as he approached the threshold of the public meeting chamber. The gesture was one of frustration, a habit he'd picked up from his years of diplomatic service, though it looked somewhat different when performed by someone with his reptilian features. As he crossed into the vast circular room, all 11 ambassadors turned their attention to him. The whispers began immediately. Soft murmurs in a dozen different languages and tonal patterns that his translator couldn't quite catch from this distance. But he didn't need to hear the words to know their content. This was yet another meeting the humans would miss. And worse, this was the last one before the confrontation with the Actral Alliance. His clawed hands adjusted the long ceremonial robes that marked his status as senior ambassador of the Draconis Collective. The fabric, a deep purple that complemented his white scales, had been specially woven to withstand the varying atmospheric conditions of the council chamber. His red eyes, a stark contrast against the pale scales and crocodile-like snout, surveyed the room as he mentally prepared for the barrage of questions he knew was about to be thrown at him. The intelligence reports were clear. The Actral Alliance was preparing to target one of their high-priority infrastructure positions. This mobilization to defend their assets would likely determine the fate of half the galaxy, and humanity had chosen this moment to be absent. The tension in the room was more than obvious as Savick made his way to his designated seat. Before he could even settle into the specially designed chair that accommodated his tail, a massive fist slammed onto the table with enough force to make the holographic display flicker. Ambassador Vaxo of the Ferrari Confederation had risen to his full height, all 3 meters of him. The giant bipedal warrior's most distinctive feature, a single stripe of silver fur that started on his forehead and ran across the top of his head down to the lower part of his spine, seemed to bristle. His muscular frame, evolved from a species that had survived on a high-gravity world through pure physical dominance, commanded the immediate attention of every being in the room. Ambassador Savick, Vaxo began, his voice a controlled rumble that the translator rendered as semi-polite, though Savick could hear the underlying frustration. You have maintained what some would call a friendship with the human ambassador, Henry Higgs. In this time of crisis with the Actral breathing down our necks, surely you must know where humanity stands. Where they are. Savick's mind drifted momentarily to his relationship with Henry. Could they be called friends? The human had once invited him to something called a barbecue, a gathering that involved cooking meat over open flames in what seemed like a deliberately primitive fashion. Despite humans being omnivorous, Savick had been rather impressed by the variety and quantity of meat offered. Henry had laughed when Savick had consumed nearly 20 pounds of what the humans called brisket, explaining that his species' carnivorous metabolism was remarkably efficient. They had shared stories of their respective worlds, and Henry had showed genuine interest in learning about Draconis hunting traditions. Yes, Savick supposed they were friends, which made this situation all the more frustrating. I don't know what's happening with humanity, and why is they not attending the meetings, Savick said, his tone carrying the full weight of his frustration. The admission tasted bitter in his mouth. Henry hasn't responded to any of my personal communications for the past 30 standard days. Vaxo leaned forward, his massive hands spread on the table. Then perhaps we must consider an uncomfortable possibility. What if humanity has chosen not to fight? What if they're abandoning their homeworld and fleeing before our alliance loses this fight? The suggestion sparked an immediate reaction in Savick. His tail lashed once, a sign of strong disagreement among his people. "I cannot see that scenario at all," he said firmly. "Humanity has to be planning something. To simply flee, it doesn't make sense. Not for them." A new voice entered the discussion. Soeri Modak, the Trivery representative, stood gracefully. Her bipedal form was slender and elegant, with bioluminescent streaks across her skin that conveyed emotion to those who could read them. Unlike the other ambassadors who wore diplomatic robes, she was clad in light armor, a reminder that her species valued military preparedness, even in diplomatic settings. "Then perhaps," she said, her melodious voice carrying an edge, "we should consider that humanity has switched sides." Savik's response was immediate and certain. "That would be very unlikely." He stood now, addressing the entire council. "Humanity has too much at stake in this conflict. They hate the actual alliance more than anyone else here because of what happened with their colonies. 3 of their agricultural worlds were attacked 15 cycles ago. Rivers poisoned with heavy metals. Farmlands destroyed with salt bombs that will leave them barren for centuries. 40 million human colonists had to be evacuated. They lost children in those attacks. Humans don't forget such things." Soeri Modak tilted her head, a gesture that made her bioluminescent markings shift color. "Then why, Ambassador Savik, is humanity not here to discuss our final war preparations? If their hatred runs so deep, if their commitment is so strong, where are they?" "I don't know," Savik admitted, and the words felt like admitting defeat. He took a breath, his respiratory system processing the varied atmospheric mixture. "I hate this more than anyone else here. While I believe humanity wouldn't betray us, I must confess that my species is truly offended by the fact that humans have missed so many meetings without offering any justification. They have obligations to this alliance." He paused, looking around the room at the assembled representatives of a dozen civilizations. "This meeting should decide on a plan that doesn't involve humanity in the defense battle. And if we win this battle, when we win this battle, humanity will have to pay considerable reparations for any losses we incur due to their absence. That is, assuming they have a good excuse for their behavior." The response was immediate. Several ambassadors nodded in agreement, while others made their species' equivalent gestures of accord. The Zendari representatives' crystalline form chimed in harmony. The Volan ambassadors' tendrils waved in a pattern of consensus, and even the usually neutral Yassir delegation signaled their agreement with a complex hand gesture. Vaxo, seeing the unity in the room, smoothly changed the subject to the matter at hand. "Then we focus on the final battle preparations without them. Our intelligence suggests the Octral will strike within the next 10 to 30 standard days. We need to position our forces accordingly." The discussion that followed was intense and detailed. Hours of tactical analysis, resource allocation, and strategic planning filled the chamber. Savik contributed his species' expertise in rapid strike warfare, while Vaxo outlined the Ferali's preferred defensive formations. The Trivery representatives suggested using their advanced sensor networks to provide early warning, and the Yassir offered their considerable fleet of medical vessels to support the combat forces. By the end of the session, Savik felt exhausted. The mental strain of planning for a battle that could determine the fate of billions, combined with the mystery of humanity's absence, had worn on him. The final decision was to split their defensive fleet in 2 parts. One would protect the shipyard system in the Kepler sector, their primary construction facility for new warships. The other would defend the fuel manufacturing rings around a yellow star designated B345, where vast solar collectors processed stellar matter into the exotic fuels their FTL drives required. "I'll take personal command of the observation post in system B345, Savick announced. It was a decision born partly from duty, and partly from a desire to be where he could potentially intercept any human ships that might arrive late to the battle. My crew and I will maintain surveillance and coordinate with both defensive positions. The council agreed, and as the meeting concluded, Savick couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. Humanity's absence felt like a void in their plans, a variable they couldn't account for. As he made his way back to his ship, he wondered if Henry was somewhere out there, planning something that none of them could foresee. 20 standard days had passed since that final meeting, and Savick found himself exactly where he'd promised to be, stationed in System B345, aboard the observation vessel Vigilant Claw. The mission had been remarkably unremarkable so far, filled with routine sensors, sweeps, and status reports. His days were spent primarily around the communication station on the bridge, where he received constant updates about the actual alliance and theories about why the anticipated attack hadn't materialized yet. The bridge of the Vigilant Claw was designed with Draconis sensibilities in mind. Dim lighting that didn't strain their sensitive eyes, surfaces that accommodated their clawed hands, and seats that properly supported their tailed anatomy. The crew, all members of his own species, worked mosey in silence. There was comfort in being surrounded by his own kind, understanding each gesture and subtle body language without the need for translation. Savick was in the middle of reviewing yet another intelligence report suggesting that the Actral might have changed their plans when chaos erupted on the bridge. Ambassador, the sensor technician, a young female named Criley, her green scales practically glowing with alarm, spun in her chair. I'm detecting massive hyperjump signatures! Before Savick could respond, another technician, this one monitoring the deeper range scanners, called out. Confirmed. At least 4,000 simultaneous jumps detected. Distance 40,000 kilometers and closing. 4,000. Savick's mind raced. That was nearly the entire actual fleet. Here. Now. The tactical officer, Commander Thax, was already pulling up defensive formations on his display. Sir, those aren't random positions. They're coming in using a Krenia assault pattern. They're going to hit us hard. Communications, Savick barked, abandoning his usual diplomatic composure. Connect me with Ambassador Vaxo immediately. Priority 1, encryption. The view screen activated, showing the interior of a Ferrari battlecruiser. Vaxo appeared on the screen, and even through the transmission, Savick could see the panic beginning to take hold of the massive warrior. Savick, my crew is reporting something wrong with the sensor readings. Vaxo's voice was strained, his usual confident rumble replaced with confusion. We're detecting Treviri signatures among the enemy fleet. That can't be right. Check your sensors. Savick turned to his sensor technician. Criley, verify those readings. Isolate any Treviri signatures. The young Draconis worked her console quickly, her claws clicking against the haptic interface. Ambassador, confirmed. I'm reading at least 800 Treviri vessels integrated into the actual formation. Their designs are unmistakable. The Treviri have betrayed us, Vaxo said, his voice hollow with disbelief. They've switched sides. Sawari, Modak. Oh, she was in our planning sessions. She knows our entire defense strategy. Savick's mind raced through the implications, but something felt wrong. Wait, Vaxo. If the Treviri have switched sides, why is there only 4,000 ships here? The actual alliance has at least 9,000 vessels, and the Treviri fleet has another 2,000. Where are the rest? Vaxo's eyes widened on the screen. The shipyard. They're splitting their forces. Without ceremony, Savick cut the connection with Vaxo and immediately ordered a connection to the Yasia representative at the shipyard defensive position on the other side of the galaxy. The FTL communication channels, expensive to maintain, but essential for coordinated defense, crackled to life. The face that appeared on the screen was not the calm, collected Yasia Ambassador Savick was used to seeing. Ambassador Quillix's usual pristine feathers were ruffled, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in a pattern that indicated extreme stress. "Savig, oh, thank the ancestors you've called." Quillix's voice was high and strained. "We're under massive attack here. 5,400 ships, Savig. The Trivery are among them, and they knew exactly where our defensive positions were. They're pushing through our lines like they have our entire battle plan, which they do." The sounds of battle could be heard in the background, alarms, shouted orders, the distinctive whine of weapons charging. "I can't talk long," Quillix continued. "We're trying to coordinate a counter-offensive, but they're hitting us from blind spots we didn't even know we had. The Trivery must have been feeding them information for months." "How bad is it?" Savik asked, though he feared the answer. "We've lost 300 ships in the first 10 minutes alone. The flagship Eternal Dawn is retreating. Her shields are down to 15%. The medical frigates are already overwhelmed. Savig, without reinforcements, we'll lose the position within the hour." The connection suddenly filled with static. "I'm needed at tactical," Quillix said hurriedly. "May fortune favor us all." The screen went dark. Savik stood in the center of his bridge, the crew looking for him for guidance. The reports were coming in fast and harsh now. "Ambassador," Commander Thax reported, his voice professionally calm despite the catastrophic news. "All simulations show defeat within 90 minutes at current loss rates. With the humans missing and the Trivery on the enemy side, attacking both fronts simultaneously, sir, we cannot win this battle." 350 ships lost now, another officer reported. "The Constellation's Pride just went dark. Oh, that's 2 dreadnoughts down." "The Ferrari flagship is taking heavy damage," Criley added. "Ambassador Vaxo's ship is trying to rally a defensive line, but they're outnumbered 3-1 in their sector." Savik's mind struggled with the decision before him. Should he inform his homeworld that it was over? Should he tell them to evacuate whoever they could to the secret colonies? Those hidden worlds that not even their allies knew the Draconis had claimed. Places prepared for exactly this sort of catastrophic scenario. "Ambassador," the captain of the Vigilant Claw, an elderly Draconis named Versik, whose scales had gone silver with age, spoke quietly. "We still have time to jump back to the homeworld. We could begin evacuations. Save who we can." Savik was about to agree. What else could they do? When Criley nearly fell out of her chair. "Ambassador!" she shouted, all protocol forgotten. "I'm detecting... Oh, this can't be right. 10,000 new signatures just appeared. They're materializing at the rear of the actual formation." The bridge fell silent. 10,000 ships. That was impossible. No one had a fleet that size, unless... "Humans," Savik whispered. Criley took a moment, her claws interacting with her console, double and triple checking her readings. "Confirmed, sir. Human energy signatures. Sir, they came in weapons hot. They're firing everything, railguns, missiles, and... Sir, I'm reading weapon signatures I've never seen before. Some kind of directed energy weapon that's cutting through actual shields like they're not even there." "Get me Vaxo again," Savik ordered. But when the connection established, Vaxo was no longer in panic. The massive Furali was standing at his command station, roaring orders with renewed vitality. "Push harder! All ships maximum offensive! The humans have given us the opening we need! Strike at their exposed flanks!" "Vaxo!" Savik called out. The Furali ambassador turned to the screen, and for the first time in 20 days, Savik saw him smile. A terrifying display of teeth that would have frightened most species, but filled Savik with hope. "Did you see them, Savik? 10,000 human ships. They're tearing through the actual formation like hungry predators. Oh!" Savik turned back to his crew. "Show me the battle." The main view screen switched to a tactical display, and what Savik saw defied belief. The human fleet had indeed arrived at the perfect moment, appearing in the one position where the actual alliance had no defenses, because who would be insane enough to jump that close to a star's gravity well? The humans, apparently. But it wasn't just the positioning that was remarkable. The human ships were employing tactics and weapons that seemed to come from nowhere. Swarms of tiny drone ships, no bigger than shuttles, were harassing capital ships like insects, somehow piercing shields with concentrated fire. Railguns, primitive kinetic weapons that most species had abandoned centuries ago, were somehow accelerated to such speeds that they punched through advanced armor like paper. And there were other things, energy signatures that the sensors couldn't even properly classify. "Sir," Crix's voice cracked with excitement, "something's happening near the Trivery ship." The tactical display zoomed in, and Savick watched in stunned silence as empty space suddenly rippled. A human ship, a massive angular thing that looked more like a flying knife than a spacecraft, materialized directly above the Trivery flagship. In one overwhelming barrage that lasted less than 10 seconds, the human vessel unleashed everything it had. Missiles, energy beams, kinetic rounds, and something that looked like controlled lightning tore into the Trivery ship. The huge flagship, pride of the Trivery fleet, simply ceased to exist. Where once there had been a 2-kilometer-long vessel, now there was only expanding debris and gas. And then as suddenly as it had appeared, the human ship vanished again, its form rippling and disappearing like a predator returning to tall grass. The battlefield froze. For a moment that stretched into eternity, neither side fired. The destruction of a flagship was always significant, but the way it had been done, appearing from nowhere, striking with overwhelming force then disappearing again, sent a clear message. We can reach you anywhere, anytime, and you won't see us coming. The Actral formation began to break. Ships that had been pressing their attack suddenly reversed thrust. The coordinated assault became a chaotic scramble as individual captains decided that survival outweighed orders. The fear was clear. If the humans had one ship that could do that, how many more were out there, invisible, waiting? "They're routing," Commander Thax reported, disbelief clear in his voice. "The entire Actral offensive is falling apart. They're trying to jump out, but the humans are jamming their navigation system somehow." "Sir," the communications officer interrupted. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet. It's Ambassador Higgs." "Put him through," Savick ordered immediately. The screen filled with Henry's familiar face. The human was smiling. That characteristic expression that showed too many teeth but somehow managed to convey warmth rather than aggression. He was wearing what looked like a military uniform rather than his usual diplomatic attire, and behind him Savick could see the bridge of what was clearly a warship. "Savick, my friend," Henry said, his voice hinting genuine happiness. "It's good to see you alright." Savick tried to be angry. He wanted to be furious at this human who had left them all to wonder and worry, who had missed crucial meetings and nearly let them face destruction alone. But seeing Henry's face, knowing that humanity had arrived at the perfect moment with overwhelming force, he found his anger evaporating. "Henry," he said, trying to keep his voice stern and failing, "you owe me an explanation. You owe us all an explanation." Henry's expression sobered slightly. "I know, and I'm sorry. We suspected betrayal, Savick. That's why we stopped attending the meetings." "Betrayal?" Savick leaned forward. "You knew about Trivery?" "We suspected," Henry corrected. "Something in the intelligence reports didn't add up. Patrol schedules been leaked, supply routes have been compromised in ways that suggested inside information. We knew someone in the council was feeding information to the Actral, but we didn't know who or how many." The battle continued to rage on the tactical display, but it was clear now that the tide had turned decisively. The Actral forces were in full retreat, and the human ships were pursuing, disabling engines and weapons, but notably not destroying all ships that were trying to flee. "Why didn't you tell me?" Savick asked, and he heard the hurt in his own voice. "I thought we were friends." Henry's expression became pained. "We are friends, Savick. I vouched for you personally. I told them that you, and the Draconis could be trusted completely. but it was a decision made above my level. Humanity's joint chiefs decided that the only way to be sure, the only way to catch the traitors and ensure our fleet wouldn't walk into a trap was to tell no one. So you were watching this full time? Preparing, Henry corrected. Building. We've been constructing ships around the clock for the past year. Every shipyard, every orbital platform, even civilian craft were retrofitted for war. We knew this battle was coming, and we knew we'd only get one chance to make it count. Savick processed this information, his tactical mind appreciating the strategy even as his diplomatic side was appalled by the deception. Henry, the other front, the shipyard is under attack too. 5,400 enemy ships, we've lost hundreds already. Henry's smile returned and he actually laughed. Already handled, my friend. Half our fleet is there. Well, actually 45%, since our stealth destroyers are currently wreaking havoc on actual infrastructure as we speak. We've been tracking their supply bases and command centers for months. The war, Savick, is effectively over. 10,000 ships, Savick said, still struggling to process the magnitude. How did humanity build 10,000 warships without anyone knowing? Oh, we didn't, Henry said casually. We built about 3,000 actual warships. The rest are converted civilian vessels, mining ships with guns strapped to them, cargo haulers turned into missile boats. Hell, we even conscripted some cruise liners and turned them into drone carriers. Humans are quite creative when our backs are against the wall. Plus, about 1,000 of those signatures you're seeing are decoys. Really impressive decoys that emit the same energy signatures as real ships, but decoys nonetheless. The absurdity of it all. Humanity showing up with a fleet made of converted civilian ships and holographic ghosts, somehow turning the tide of a war that had seemed lost just minutes ago, struck Savick, and he found himself making a sound that his translator couldn't quite parse. It might have been laughter. What do we do now? Savick asked. Well, Henry said, his grin widening, after we finish mopping up here, I was hoping to take you up on that promise of trying your people's equivalent of barbecue. You mentioned something about carnivorous delicacies that would make Earth brisket look tame. Savick blinked. In the middle of the largest space battle in recent galactic history, with the fate of civilizations having hung in the balance, the human remembered a casual promise made at a diplomatic gathering months ago. You remembered that? Savick asked, incredulous. Of course. I've been curious ever since. Besides, we're going to need one hell of a victory celebration after this. To his own surprise, Savick found himself reciprocating the human smile, his lips pulling back to show his own impressive array of teeth. Then I formally invite you and your command staff to an after-war celebration under Conus Prime. We'll show you how predator species truly celebrate victory. Accepted, Henry said enthusiastically. I'll bring the beer. You wouldn't believe how much alcohol a fleet this size goes through. We actually converted 2 destroyers into brewery ships. Priorities, you know. The connection remained open as both ambassadors turned to watch the tactical display. The battle was winding down now, with actual forces either destroyed, disabled, or in full retreat. The great battle of the Trivery had been not only exposed, but turned into a trap for the betrayers themselves, and humanity, absent for so many crucial meetings, had appeared at the perfect moment, with overwhelming and unexpected force. Savick reflected on everything that had transpired. In less than an hour they had gone from facing certain defeat to achieving total victory. The secret colonies would remain secret, unused. His people would not need to flee their homeworld. Captain, Savick said, turning to the elderly commander of his ship. Yes, Ambassador? Set course for home, but send a message ahead. Tells them to prepare for a celebration, not an evacuation. We're going to need a lot of meat. The humans are coming to dinner. The captain's scaled face cracked into what might have been a smile. Yes, sir. Shall I also inform them that you managed to save the galaxy with the fleet held together by improvisation? Savick considered this. No, Captain. I don't think anyone would believe it. I'm watching it happen and I believe it myself. On the screen, Henry was coordinating with his fleet, issuing orders like someone who had been planning this moment for months. As Savick watched, he noticed something else. Human ships were already beginning rescue operations, picking up escape pods from destroyed actual vessels, even rendering aid to damaged enemy ships that were no longer combat capable. "Henry," Savick said, drawing the human's attention back. "Your ships are rescuing enemy crews." "Of course," Henry said, as if this was obvious. "The war's over, Savick. They're not enemies anymore. They're prisoners of war who need medical attention. Besides, we're going to need someone to formally surrender to, and corpses can't sign treaties or pay for our damages." It was such a fundamentally human response. Practical and compassionate in equal measure. The same species that had just unleashed devastating firepower and deployed invisible warships was now concerning itself with saving the lives of those who had, minutes ago, been trying to kill them. "The Council is going to have many questions," Savick said. "I'm sure they will," Henry agreed. "But that's what we have ambassadors for, right? To answer the hard questions and smooth over the rough patches. Speaking of which, I should probably prepare a formal apology for missing all those meetings." "It should be a very good apology," Savick said, though his tone was more amused than angry now. "Oh, it will be. I'm thinking a formal dinner, Earth's finest cuisine, and a detailed explanation of how we turn cargo haulers into battleships. Plus, I'll bring that chocolate you liked so much from the last reception. You'll need more than chocolate to smooth this over with some of the council members. Good thing we just saved everyone then. That should help our case a bit." As the two continued their banter, the last of the actual forces jumped out of the system, leaving behind a field of debris and disabled ships. The great battle for System B345 was over, and despite all odds, despite betrayal and overwhelming enemy numbers, they had won. "Savick," Henry said, his tone becoming serious for a moment. "I really am sorry we couldn't tell you. It killed me to ignore your messages, to let you think we'd abandoned the Alliance." "I understand," Savick replied, and found that he meant it. "So next time humanity decides to save the galaxy, perhaps a small hint wouldn't go amiss." "Next time?" Henry laughed. "Let's hope there isn't a next time. Do you have any idea how expensive it was to convert all those ships? We're going to be paying off the loans for decades. The entire human economy is basically running on IOUs and promises right now. And yet you came. Of course we came. You don't abandon your friends, Savick, even if you have to pretend to for a while, to catch the real betrayers." The word friend settled something in Savick's mind. Yes, they were friends, and perhaps that's what had made the difference. Not the grand alliances and formal treaties, but the personal connections between beings who, despite coming from different worlds and different species, could share a meal and trust each other. "So," Henry said, clearly ready to shift back to lighter topics, "tell me more about this Draconis barbecue. Are we talking whole animals or parts? Because I should warn you, humans have gotten pretty creative with outdoor cooking. We got something on the Missouri who claims he can smoke a whole buffalo." Savick found himself genuinely laughing now. That strange sound his translator couldn't quite capture. "We typically hunt live prey and cook it immediately after the kill. It's a tradition going back thousands of years." "Hunt? As in, actually chase down an animal?" "Of course. The hunt is part of the celebration, though we'll make accommodations for human guests. I don't think your species is built for chasing down a Kruger beast." "You'd be surprised what humans will do for a good barbecue," Henry said with a grin. "But I appreciate the accommodation. My running days are long behind me." As they talked, the tactical display showed the human fleet beginning to form up, preparing to jump to the next battle site or back to secure positions. The immediate danger was over. But there would be much work ahead, treaties to negotiate, reparations to arrange, and a new galactic order to establish now that the Trivery had shown their true colors. But for now, in this moment, Savick allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in 60 days. Hope. Humanity might be unpredictable, might ignore protocols and miss meetings, might show up to a military engagement with converted cruise liners and beer-brewing destroyers, but when the moment came, they were there. "Captain," Savick said, making a decision, "add one more thing to that message home. Tells him that humanity is not only invited to our celebration, there's a guest of honor, and we're going to need a lot more meat than we possibly have." "How much more, sir?" Savick looked at the tactical display showing thousands of human vessels, enough to feed 10,000 hungry warriors who just saved the galaxy. I think that's the least we can do. As the Vigilant Claw prepared to jump back to Draconis Prime, Savick took one last look at the battlefield. It would go down in history, he knew. The Battle of B345, where humanity's unconventional approach to warfare had turned betrayal into victory, where converted civilian ships had stood against purpose-built warships, and won, where the galaxy had learnt that humans, when pushed, could be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The war was over. The unexpected had triumphed, and somewhere in the vast expanse of space, 10,000 human ships, some real, some fake, all dangerous in their own way, were heading home, victorious. It had been, Savick reflected, a very human victory indeed.